You are muted. We can't hear a thing you're saying. See the little red thing?
There we go.
All right. The next thing is,
Why don't you say the privilege of the floor?
oh, okay.
You
Is
better
there
read
anyone
them.
privilege of the floor? Ed.
Oh, thank you. Hiya, guys. Hi, Chuck. I wanted to comment on all three of the proposals for tonight. The first one would be your number one, Danby Road, Michael Bianconi. Actually, I have no comment about this particular applicant or the proposal. I'm just saying that I'm sad to see what is a relatively rural downtown being carved up into smaller and smaller lots. I know that's what the town intended, and I'm saying I'm sorry to see it. Jumping ahead to your third one on East Miller, the Tomo Shibata. I don't understand why this is even being talked about. The BZA should have rejected it right off the spot, and I hope that you will advise them to reject it. This is a 10-acre zone. It's already a smaller than 10-acre lot, which has the right to build because it was pre-existing. Dividing it into 1-acre lots is creating another hamlet situation where it's supposed to be open country. So I hope you will reject or pass do not do this advice back to the BZA. And finally, we get to the Beardsley Lane, Jeremy Thompson. I don't know how much wiggle room you have here, whether you can reject it or whether you can impose conditions. But I remember discussions about this property in the past. And I have to say that maybe I'm remembering wrong, or maybe I'm hearing the wrong rumors, but this particular applicant has had a record of promising one thing and delivering another, and having to stop work and fix things, going ahead without permission. One thing that I kind of remember, but your records, of course, would be more accurate than my memory, was that when he originally talked about, when he originally got permission to build this, he said it was lots of bedrooms for his family to visit. I vaguely remember somebody saying that he was promising not to have to rent it out, even though a house with 7 bedrooms is obviously a little bit unusual. It's certainly not in keeping with the character of that neighborhood, or in keeping with the fact that this was supposed to be agricultural land set aside during the building of that development. If you must allow it, I hope that you will put into writing and as a condition the things that he is promising now. For example, that it will be rented only to families, and preferably only to one family at a time. That perhaps you might put a minimum stay on it so that there is not a shuffle of families going in and out of there on a daily basis. That he must maintain a residence in the sort of apartment he has for himself within that large house. In other words, do everything you can to protect that neighborhood from what amounts to a motel. I don't know I could say any more than that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. Is there anyone else? Pamela?
Thank you. Was just made aware of the proposal to have a 4-acre lot divided into 1-acre, or the request, I should say, 1-acre parcels. I want to add my voice in objecting to basically creating a 4-acre high density zone in the middle of a low density zone. I don't think this is appropriate and not in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. So again, to pass on to the BZA that this should just simply be denied. It's not in keeping with the zoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. Rhonda? She's not.
Since the minutes of the planning board meeting were not available until sometime after 11 o'clock this morning, I hope you will give me a few extra minutes because I didn't have time to type anything up. I do have 2 things to say, and one's going to take a long time. I do agree with everybody else that the Shibata proposal is unrealistic, and a few other things. Ms. Shibata was given somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes at the town board meeting, and all of the town board members told her very, very succinctly that what she was proposing was not realistic and not appropriate. And so I'm disappointed in the BZA. We don't need to have them asking for hand-holding. No, this should be denied. Number 2, I want to talk about the Beardsley Lane property, and I want you to understand some things that have happened in the past. So backstory. In 2006, when I put up my website, ilovethefingerlakes.com, which is the largest tourism website in the Finger Lakes region, I included in there lists of places where people could rent for short term, including Airbnb and vacation rentals by owner. And so I noticed at one point, I got to thinking about what was going on in Danby, and I went into the bigger facilities, Airbnb as one, and did some searching and looked at Danby and some others and found that Danby had numerous facilities listed on Airbnb. And I said to Tom Knipe, who was the planner at the time for the county, and his job was to deal with tourism, I said, I'm sure that there are hundreds of facilities in Tompkins County. This is out of control, and we're not even recognizing it as a form of rental. And so, you know, he sort of poo-pooed it, and I said, look, it's not that hard to go into these websites and search using keywords and find out exactly how many facilities in Tompkins County are using these, excuse me, I'm speaking, using these facilities. And so he said, okay. And so he got the Ithaca College students to do it and found that there were hundreds of these facilities that were in Tompkins County. And I guesstimate that at this point in time, there are over 200 facilities in Danby alone. One is right on 96B near the intersection of Miller Road, where a house has their basement. Yes.
This is the time limit.
I think you have a time limit too, and your limit is to get the minutes up on time, 24 hours before the meeting.
I'm not going to respond. Okay. Is there anyone else? All right, thank you. Oh, I didn't see her. I can't see those. Okay. Is she muted?
Catherine, you can unmute.
Are you calling on me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I'm just going to say that I'm glad there are so many people here, and they are people who have spoken out at meeting after meeting on a couple of these things. So I'm pleased that so many people are participating. Thank you, everybody, for participating in our meetings.
Thank you, Catherine. Do you see any more? I don't. Yeah. Is there anyone else? All right, thank you. So we're going to move to the town board liaison report. There is no approval of the minutes because we didn't. Do we have to do November's?
We do, but
we don't have them out. Okay. So we will not have an approval of the minutes this month. So we move on to the town board liaison report. And Leslie, can you?
There, did I unmute myself?
Yes.
Okay. I had a message saying I couldn't. Anyway, I'll keep it short. We had our organizational meeting at the beginning of the month where we mostly recognized or considered amendments to policies and procedures and appointed people to boards and committees. We're going to finish that up tomorrow night. If people have nothing to do tomorrow night, come join us. We revised the building code and property maintenance law to include new state requirements. Joel and Pat have been participating in union negotiations. Most of our, I don't know if you know that most of our highway staff are union members. So that's a task that Joel and Pat have taken on. Is Jacob there? I can't see. Oh, there he is. Okay.
Yes, I am.
Okay. Welcome, Jacob. And still new planning board member.
Thank you.
Yeah. The town board had appointed Steve Weisberg to fill an empty position on the town board for the next year. And he's been attending, and we'll see if he shows up tomorrow night. So, we're potentially going to be considering logging log that's in a draft form. It should be up on the website, and it would be nice to have your feedback on that. I assume maybe David will talk about the Restore New York grant later. And the Jersey Hill culvert is being replaced, and it'll take about 2 months. So go a different way. That's enough.
Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah.
So we'll move on to the first item on the agenda, which is, and you're going to put up,
Yes.
sorry, put up the map so we can take a look at it. Is the applicant here?
Is it Michael?
Michael, yes. And so the anticipated action is a public hearing, a SEQR, and consider preliminary and final approval. So would you like to step up and tell us?
Sure. My name is Mike Bianconi. I have a little bit of land down the road. I might want to build another house on it. I've gone to some banks. They prefer to parcel off and qualify for any loans. I might not ever build on it. I just want to have all my ducks in a row in case I ever go to the bank.
Pretty much that simple. For me, anyway. There's no neighbors on it. It's not really a neighborhood. There's no neighbors on either side. I don't think it's gonna impede anybody's view of anything or disrupt anything. It'll be a quiet house if I ever do decide to build there.
Okay,
Pretty
thank
much
you.
it, yeah.
So it's to subdivide their 2.2 acre lot roughly in half is what we're looking at.
I'll bring this down here so I don't fix it. Give myself a mic. So this, oh, I can grab another one too, but I figured this would be easier. This is the map provided by the applicant. Danby Road is at the bottom of this map. And White Hawk is behind to the top of the map. So he's proposing cutting the lot in half, having approximately an acre in each half. Obviously, this isn't a final survey, so he was hoping to get feedback from the board, and he can then take that and procure a survey and come back for preliminary and final approval at the next meeting.
Okay.
But we do need to open the public hearing.
Okay. So the public hearing is open.
I don't see anyone on Zoom. Is there anyone in the room to speak on this proposal? I see lots of heads saying no. I see Ted Crane.
Who?
Ted.
Ted.
Go ahead, Ted, you're unmuted.
Yep, thank you. As I said earlier during privilege of the floor, I have no particular comment about this specific parcel or request to subdivide. I think it's just too bad. That's a pretty open, regardless of where it is on the zoning map, that's a pretty open area. And it'd be nice to leave open areas as open areas wherever possible. But that's not specific to this one. And perhaps he will do a very nice job of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Anyone else? I don't see anything. We can close the public hearing then. Yep. All right, we'll close the public hearing. And then we have to go through the SEQR, right? Or you already have it.
We can declare lead agency. Planning board is comfortable being lead agency, and we can look at, there's the part 1 here. We could fill out the part 2, which I can put on the screen. Does anyone want to make a resolution to declare lead agency?
motion to declare lead agency.
Thank you.
Want to do roll call?
Know who everybody is yet.
Oh.
Okay. Bergman,
Yes.
Scriber,
Yes.
Davis,
Yes.
Cohen.
Cowan, yes.
Cowan, sorry. Benucci. Maher. Yes. Colbert.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Great. If folks would like to walk through the part 2 seeker form, we can do that. The board comfortable with that?
Mhm.
All right. So I'm going to ask the questions and I'll walk through them and just stop me if you believe the answer is not no or small impacts may occur. Will the proposed action create a material conflict with an adopted land use plan or zoning regulations? No. Will the proposed action result in a change in the use or intensity of use of land? And a reminder that this is compared to the zoning. Will the proposed action impair the character and quality of the existing community? No. Will the proposed action have an impact on the environmental characteristics that cause the establishment of a critical environmental area? Reminder, we don't have any.
No.
Will the proposed action result in an adverse change in the existing level of traffic or affect existing infrastructure for mass transit, biking, or walking?
No.
Will the proposed action cause an increase in the use of energy and it fails to incorporate reasonably available energy conservation and renewable energy opportunities? Good chance to remind the applicant that the town has adopted the stretch code, which is slightly stronger energy requirements for building, which you would get to when you applied for a building permit. Will the proposed action impact existing public-private water or utilities? No. Will the proposed action impair the character or quality of an important historic, archaeological, architectural, or aesthetic resource? No. Will the proposed action result in any adverse changes to natural resources, wetlands, water bodies, groundwater, air quality, flora, or fauna? No. Will the proposed action result in an increase in potential for erosion, flooding, or drainage problems? No. And will the proposed action create a hazard to environmental resources or human health? No. Okay, that brings us to having checked all no's. We need someone to move that as determined above and any supporting documentation in the application, the proposed action will not result in any significant adverse environmental impacts.
I will move that we accept that. Motion to accept that.
I'll second. Ellie. Bergman.
Yes.
Scriber.
Yes.
Davis.
Yes.
Cowan.
Yes.
Benucci.
Yes.
Maher. Yes. And Colbert.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Okay. The next step is to provide the applicant if you have any feedback of how they should change the line that they drew right down the middle. If you're comfortable with the line right down the middle, you can let them know and they can get a final survey, come back next meeting.
Yeah, it makes the most sense to make them go lot. I know.
Do you have any other questions for the board?
No, I guess I'm not out of exactly what my next step is.
Get a survey. The surveyor will put pins in the ground at the locations that divide it. Then come back. We can talk about what needs to be on the plat, but you'll bring an official plat. It has a spot for the chair to sign. As soon as we have that, then at the next meeting, they can review it and approve it.
Okay, I guess I'm not, where do I go in the survey?
From a surveyor?
A surveyor,
Yeah. There are several of them. If you Google it, I can't recommend any of them as a representative of the town. I will say, I don't think the board has seen any that haven't come from TG Miller in the last 3 years. There are other surveyors. Oh yeah, Kelly might. That's an architect.
Yeah. You mean other ones?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Huh? Yeah. Not always.
Yeah. I'll Google surveyor. Thank you again, everybody.
Okay, so we're moving on to the Beardsley Lane proposal. And the applicant is Jeremy Thompson. Let me see.
Jeremy is here. Jeremy, I'm asking you to unmute. There you go. We hear you good.
So I'll let Chuck Gutman kind of introduce and lead this proposal. So I'd like to turn the mic to him.
Am I the only one that can't hear?
No, I'm sorry, Jeremy, we couldn't hear that at all. It's very muffled. Did you say you want to turn it over to your attorney to present? Oh, Charles Gutman. There we go. You can unmute, Charles.
Thank you. I'm Charles Gutman. I am an attorney. I'm here in support of Jeremy's application. And for the record, I have offices in Ithaca at 411 North Tioga Street. I think hopefully the board has all the background information. What I would like to make a couple of comments preliminarily. One, Jeremy's intention was to be present this evening. He was down in Texas visiting family and had car trouble and could not get back in time. So that's the only reason he's not present today in person. Secondly, I heard the comments from Ted Crane, and I would like to address those. I believe the board has in its possession a letter which Jeremy wrote to the neighbors on Beardsley Lane dated December 7, which I think addresses a lot of the issues which Ted rose. Number one, and we intend that what he's stating in this as his plan would be conditions that the board would impose. His plan is that it will be vacation rental by owner, but limited to less than 180 days per year. It's going to be to families. Had asked one family at a time. I don't think that was specified, but that was the intention in the letter of December 7th. It's only to families, and it's going to be one family at a time, and that while it is being rented to guests, that Jeremy will be in residence at the property. So I think what Ted addressed is the intention of this is not to be a motel. That is not his intention at all. The other thing I would like to address is under section 805, you have the general considerations that the board should be considering in this matter, all of which make obvious sense. And I think there are 15 different factors there. I submit that most of them are not particularly relevant for this application. The adequacy of pedestrian and bicycle traffic, it's not really relevant for this. There's a lot that don't apply to this. So I'll address the ones which I think are most applicable, and they all center around the same concept. you've got consideration number 6, protection of adjacent community properties and the general public against noise, glare, unsightliness, odors, etc. You've got consideration number 10, which is compatibility of the structures with adjacent land. You've got 15D, which is that new development would be hidden or screened from the road and neighboring properties. And 15H is that parking of vehicles would also be screened. In my view, all of those really go to the same point, is that what's going on there would not adversely affect the neighboring properties and also would not be an eyesore from Route 96. If you're looking at it from Route 96, as part of the conditions which the board established to allow the building of this structure, there is a berm between the building and Route 96, and there's going to be vegetation on top of that berm. Vegetation is not planted now because it's January. We couldn't plant it in the winter. The intention is that it will be planted as soon as that can be done in the spring. And I think we've been told that the final approval, the final certificate of occupancy will await until we have the vegetation established. So if you're looking at it from Route 96, basically we've got vegetative screening already. And if you're looking at it from 96, what it looks like is a single family residence, no different than any of the other houses on Beardsley Lane. The second question is how it affects the adjacent properties, and particularly properties further down the hill on Beardsley Lane. And what we've done is we've put in screening, again, vegetative screening on that side also, so that the properties farther down Beardsley Lane are not seeing it. Particularly the screening of the house itself, the screening of the parking area. So it's not going to be unsightly to any of the neighboring properties. As a matter of fact, from any of the neighboring properties, it is going to look like a single family home. What it is, more than half the year will be just a single family home. In terms of noise, there is a significant different distance from this property with the neighbors. But again, that vegetative screening does have an effect on noise. Probably more significantly, the intention is that the guests will be only families, one family at a time. This is not going to be rented to college students for beer parties and whatever. That's not what's going to happen. And Jeremy's going to be in residence at the property while guests are there, which also has a significant effect on noise or any other improper behaviors. So he's going to be there to make sure that does not occur. He actually has had for many years a bed and breakfast in the city of Ithaca on Madison Street. And he again rents that only to families, not individual bedrooms. He's spoken to the neighbors in the city of Ithaca and has been informed that they have not had any problems. This property is kept very well maintained. The guests who are there are not causing problems in the neighborhood. And that's a situation where he's not living there. With him being there, if anything, it'd be much, much less. So our position is that if you look at the factors, the general considerations that the board is to look at, the intent is to make sure that this is not adversely affecting the neighborhoods. And he is doing everything he can, has done everything he can to make sure that that has not occurred. And he will intention by being there to again make sure that this is not adversely affecting any of the neighbors. If the board wants more detail regarding exactly what type of screening is where, I would defer to Jeremy because he knows that much better than I do. We're happy to entertain any questions from the board. And if there's other members of the public who have comments we welcome listening to those. We'd like the opportunity to respond after we hear them. I would point out that we sent this letter on December 7th, which is over a month ago, I think, to all the neighbors on Beardsley Lane, asking that if they had comments, concerns, something he could do to minimize any adverse effect, to let him know. He has not received a response from any neighbors. If anyone had concerns, we would have wanted to hear them so we can respond to them. Maybe we could modify things in some way. I'm not sure how, but it's impossible to figure out how to respond to things if you don't hear the comments. So that's all I have to say at this point. Obviously, we're very interested in hearing comments from the board and being able to respond to them. So, thank you.
So this is the first time the board is seeing this application. I did advertise and schedule a public hearing. So if you feel like you have the basic information you need, we can hold the public hearing today. You could hold the public hearing and hold another public hearing in the future if you'd like to let people who came to talk today talk and keep it open for a future meeting. What I think about is, do you have the information you need to make a decision? If not, what more do you want? Obviously we'll have some discussion, but do we want to open the public hearing?
I do think if we're going to open the public hearing, which I think we should, so no people came, I do think we should leave it open for next month as well. Obviously, they would have to come back and say it again. It would just be, it'll be on record from now until then. But I don't think it's fair for people that are here, but I also think that a lot of community members probably have a pretty strong feeling about this. We should leave it open. So I guess, do I need to make a motion to open it, or just go ahead and open it?
We can go ahead and open it. We don't need a motion. I would like to make an introduction to that, if it's okay.
Yes.
First, we have 8 letters from community members. So if you submitted a letter, the planning board has it. It's in the online folder for anyone to see as well. Planning board members have read it. So you don't need to make the same comment again. It's not a good use of time. Of course, I'm not going to stop you, but if you want to make a 3-minute speech and say the same thing, it'd be a better use of time to not repeat that. Also, you know, if you agree with what somebody else said and you just want to make sure that people know, you can just say, I agreed with so-and-so, everything they said is great. Finally, I think it's useful to clarify a little bit about what site plan review is and what the planning board is doing here. I'm gonna adjust the camera to be back on the board. We have been through this many times before, and I think it's useful for people to understand the process of site plan review. We have a use that's allowed by site plan review. So the job of the planning board here is to review the particulars of that instance, how it lies on the site, and to adjust the site plan in ways that will make it less impactful, or to say that this particular site is different from other sites. While it's generally an acceptable use in the zone, this particular site is not. So those are kind of the useful kinds of feedback. Of course, people will give whatever feedback they want, but I think it's helpful for people to understand what the planning board can and can't do and what is useful feedback to provide.
Going to do the public hearing now? Yeah. I think
yeah. Okay. So let's do in-person public hearing first. So you can come up to the mic. We're using the mic so that people can hear on in Zoom land.
Members of the board, thank you. My name is Randall Marcus. I'm with the firm of Bousquet Holstein here in Ithaca, 200 East Buffalo Street.
I see people going like this, so if you step closer to the mic.
Sorry about that. Do you want me to start over?
Some of us in our village are just a
Oh, I'm right behind you. Randall Marcus, yep. Law firm of Bousquet Holstein, 200 East Buffalo Street. I represent Hallie Magden and Virginia Tessie of 151 Beardsley Lane. And I wanted to just go over a few points that I think the planning board should keep foremost in mind. With all due respect to Mr. Gutman, I believe his presentation entirely ignored the singular basic point of the decision that the planning board has to make on this issue. If I could just read in part your town zoning ordinance. The town zoning law only allows what the applicant is asking for, which your zoning law refers to as a tourist home, only allows this use if this use is secondary to the occupancy of the dwelling by a family. And other related uses as defined in your zoning law, hotel, motel, boarding house, are simply not allowed in this zoning district whatsoever. Only a tourist home is, and only if its use as a tourist home is secondary to the occupancy. The other point in your zoning law that comes into play, and I'll tie these back together in a moment, is the definition of principal use. The principal use is defined as the purpose for which a lot or structure is designed, arranged, intended, or for which it may be occupied. I cannot understand how a planning board determined that a 7-bedroom house occupied by a single owner would be necessarily used as a residence. It's the reason. It's contrary to the definition in the town zoning law. So while I don't agree that Mr. Gutman's list of criteria is applicable when you do a site plan review, I don't think you even get to the list of criteria in the first place, because I don't believe that a planning board logically analyzing this situation could determine that the principal use of this house is as a residence for the owner. And I think the applicant has basically made the same point that I'm trying to make. In the letter that he sent to the neighbors, he specifically stated, if you bear with me one second.
About 1 minute remaining.
I need to lease unused bedrooms to guests to recover and sustain financial viability of my investment. An owner who refers to this property as his investment doesn't appear to me to be thinking of this property as his home primarily. I'm not disagreeing that he may live there, but if you're residing in 1 out of 7 bedrooms, I do not see how you can conclude that the use is as the owner's residence. I don't think there's anything very complicated about this analysis. I think your zoning law does all the heavy lifting here, and you simply need to arrive at the conclusion that this is not a permitted use in the low density residential district. I'll honor your warning. Thank you.
So I'm Andrew Corov. I live at 111 Beardsley Lane, which is actually next door to Jeremy's property. And I'm obviously here to oppose the giving out of this permit. And beyond that, what Randy was talking about, I think the board has tremendous discretion for number one, in awarding this permit, and number two, in writing the permit in such a way that the intentions or what's being said is going to be done. And I think the enforcement and the particulars have to be put in writing in this case, so it's very specific. So I'm not going to, I was one of the people that sent a letter. I assume everybody's got the letter and read the letter, so I'm not going to take up your time, but that's what I had to say. Thank you.
Next. I think everybody wrote the letter.
My name's Andrew Purser. I live at 127 Beardsley Lane. We also sent a letter, so I'm sure you'll have that. We recently moved into the area, and I have recently read about the zoning laws as well and kind of got myself educated there. And I would agree that I oppose this permit application for most of the same grounds. I think the primary purpose of what this application is for is contrary to what a tourist house is defined as, and I think it's more along the lines of what is possibly going to be a boarding house. So I'm here to oppose this as well. Thank you.
Is there anyone?
Is there anyone in Zoom land who would like to speak for the public hearing? I don't see any hands. Okay, do we want to move to the board discussion?
Oh, Scott?
Make sure you get your mic on and speak right into it.
Yeah. The mics are so fuzzy though, you can probably hear you better without it. So 180 days a year, that's not clear. Does that mean that under this proposal that the house, that those upstairs bedrooms would be, are the bedrooms all upstairs?
They're all up some stairs.
Oh, so there's, okay, all right. That every one, that 180 days a year, there would be no guests? Or does it mean that 180 days a year, that no bedroom would be occupied more than 180 days a year, but if these overlapped, you could have 365 days a year occupancy? What could you define that? Could you clarify that, please?
See, Mr. Gutman would like to.
I can clarify, and I think it goes to Randy Marcus's comment, the intention, and we can make this clearer in writing, or the board can make it clearer as part of any approval conditions. The intention is that for no more than 180 days will there be any guests in the property other than it might be a family member, which is not.
I'm not concerned about the intention. I'm concerned about the reality.
Well, the reality will be that for at least 185 days a year, there will be no rental of any portion of the property. So for more than half of the year, there will be no rental at all. That's not only the intention, but that's a condition that we expect. It's the condition we put in writing, and we expect the board will impose that condition, because that's our intention. We accept that for maximum of 180 days. Now, it may be less in practice, but we are guaranteeing that for 185 days, there will be no bedrooms that are rented. And that, I think, goes to the question of the principal purpose, principal use of this property, is that Mr. Thompson will be there. His intention is to be there 365 days a year. I'm not saying he's not allowed to go on a vacation. When there is rental going on, he will be there. Okay. Essentially, most of the rest of the year, he will be there. It is his primary residence. And so it's right away, more than half of the year is only a primary residence.
Okay, thanks. Now, I heard language that this would only be rented to one family at a time?
Yes, that is correct.
See that in the letter, or did I miss that?
That, I believe, is in the letter.
Somewhere.
Or was that in the proposal?
Going to be rented to one family. This is in the 4th paragraph. The plan is to rent the unused bedrooms to one family as a single listing rather than renting of individual bedrooms.
Okay. So let's look at a hypothetical. Let's say that a couple that went to Cornell and graduated in 1969. They want to have a reunion in Ithaca with their adult children and their families. And there's enough, is it 7 bedrooms or 5? 5 bedrooms would accommodate that. And let's say that some of the spouses of the children drive separately. So so am I incorrect in assuming that you could have, say, 8 or 9 cars there?
I think in theory, you can have 8 or 9 cars, but then we've got 7 bedrooms. I guess it's possible that every bedroom will have 3 cars, but in reality, it's not. And example, I didn't graduate from Cornell in 69, I graduated in 71. But if my wife and I were going to rent this and we've got 3 children and we've got 6 grandchildren, I could imagine that my wife and I is 2, we've got 3 children, we've got their grandchildren. That to me is a family. In fact, my wife and I, our children and grandchildren, we consider ourselves to be a family.
I'm sorry, what was the last thing?
That to me is the definition of a family.
Okay. The other thing I was wondering about, how long do you have in mind any limit for how long a tourist stay could be? Is there any outer limit to that? If somebody were with their family and they were maybe looking at Ithaca as a place to settle down, could they stay there for 3 months?
I think the answer is yes. And that our intention is to encourage longer term rentals rather than a lot of turnover, which I think if we go to the considerations and the effect on the neighborhood, if you're going to have a family renting it for 3 months, then it's going to be very, very similar use as just a residence. I think there's much more potential of adverse effect if you're having turnover day after day after day. That's not our intention. I think by renting it to families, it will naturally encourage longer stays. And from our point of view, longer stays are great.
I just think we should acknowledge that if someone were to rent out their property short-term rental and not owner occupied, they could, correct, under the current zoning. So for us to be more restrictive or to really get into the weeds of it, I think, we're at a time where like housing affordability is a huge major issue, and we are setting a precedent with this property that we're going to have to look at as we consider other properties that have less neighbors show up for. So just something to consider. And I also think that this is a residential neighborhood that has an HOA. And if the restrictions are more restrictive than our zoning, that may be a more suitable approach to this. I understand that this applicant has been problematic, especially considering he made an application before my time on the board and we revisited it because he didn't comply with the original application. So I understand the complications of this particular applicant, but restrictions on short-term rentals when an owner is occupying the rental is actually less problematic than what we already have, which is people could just buy up properties and rent them out and then take away from the affordable housing stock. That's my opinion.
I agree with Colleen, and I would just add a few things, and that is that I think to Rhonda's point earlier, that she found, I think, hundreds of Airbnbs in Danby, and that was a surprise. They're hidden, because I don't think it's a destructive use. I think it's actually, it's common. It's much more common than we think. And I disagree, sir, with your assessment of principal use. I think in this case, if Jeremy's living in the building, maybe he's not there 365 days a year, but he's living there for somewhere around over 300, then that's more than the 180 days for occupancy by tourists or other people. So I just wanted to add that to Colleen's point.
To you.
Pardon? I can't hear what you're saying.
I'm asking if the floor is still open, if I might address the board.
You didn't make public comment earlier in the bike.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's still open.
So, Robert Goggs, I live at 155 Beardsley Lane. I also sent a letter, but I think that while I don't want to waste everyone's time, I feel like it's important to restate some of those things because I feel like the conversation is getting off some of the principal points that I feel need to be raised. So my understanding is that you have the opportunity to reject the application on the basis that it doesn't actually meet the requirements set forth in the zoning plan. Specifically, the proposal needs to meet a series of criteria. It has to be non-detrimental to the neighborhood safety and welfare, which I don't think this is necessarily the case. I think this proposal is likely to be injurious to the use and enjoyment of the neighborhood. As is clearly indicated by the number of people who are here and who have written, everyone feels very strongly that this is likely to impact their enjoyment of their properties once a quiet residential neighborhood with children and retirees. Certainly, it may influence the future development of this particular neighborhood. There are 3 undeveloped lots, and if we're going to allow a tourist home on this one, what's not to say the other lots become developed and also become tourist homes, and suddenly what's a quiet residential neighborhood becomes an Airbnb neighborhood, right? I don't think that's what the development right now is, or was intended to be. And then finally, with regards to the kind of traffic side of things, any proposal that increases the number of cars, to your point here, sir, about potentially having multiple cars associated with individual bedrooms, you could easily end up with a 7-bedroom home with 8 or 9 cars. I don't think that's beyond conceivable in the example that was illustrated. And certainly the road right next to the 96B, it's not designed for that increase in traffic. I don't think that there's going to be a zero impact for the next door neighbors having 8 or 9 cars driving in and out there. I think you have to actually accept that that's going to substantially influence the enjoyment of the neighborhood, particularly for the direct residents next door. And that's not me, I'm down at the bottom of the road, but I know how injurious that potentially has. And then finally, I think with regards to this particular applicant, I do think it is really important that you guys recognize that he has not followed the rules. He has not followed the codes. He's persistently done what he wanted to do and then asked for forgiveness afterwards. There's no reason to expect any change in behavior from this applicant. There's no reason to say why it would be 180 days. How are you guys going to be able to document that actually he's abiding by the conditions? How are you going to know? What are the enforcement criteria? And how are you actually going to ensure that what he says he's going to do? Because in the past, he's absolutely not done that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna risk my reputation with my neighborhood. I definitely agree with your final point, and I don't know if that's a point that we can have in this area, because I know like we held their temporary certificate of occupancy in the past, and I was curious myself like how we would ever go back and track if they end up. I mean, assuming they start counting and find it's been 250 days, like how is that? I don't know how that would ever come back to us, or what the repercussions are for exceeding whatever agreement is set in place. But contrary to that, I do feel that the site is slightly unique in that it is the very first property off of 96B, and though the driveway is not off of 96B and it is off of Beardsley, it isn't particularly far off of 96B. But I will say that though they did put up that section of fence to the back section of parking in the driveway, there is still, I would say, pretty significant exposure between that property and the adjacent property for like the first half or 3/4 of the driveway. And assuming that with this level of traffic in their driveway, if I were the neighbor, I would want more. And as a board member, as part of site plan review, because that's really what another portion that we can really impact, is I would push strongly for more year-round form of buffering between that property and the neighbors, whether it's significant evergreen coverage or fencing, or, and I think if and when we get to that point, I want to hear some neighbor input on whether they would rather see greenery or more permanent structural buffering between the properties. Because that, that is a pretty significant amount of traffic to that lot adjacent to their driveway and headlights and all of that scanning over, especially with the way the hill dives down there. Yeah, so that's my input.
Do you mind if I chime in for a second? So there's some things that I'm waiting for you to ask me. I'm not going to say, but I do want to make sure that we're clear and that the neighbors understand as well that the planning board cannot consider anything about the applicant in determining whether or not to approve something. So the fact that they haven't complied with previous site plan, we have to treat them just like everyone else, have requirements, obviously make sure any conditions that we're very clear about them. So it would be good to think about if the planning board wants a condition that the use is only 180 days a year, that maybe ask them to come with a defensible proposal of how that would be verified. But this is a land use approval, so it will run with the land. So it applies to all future owners and it applies independent of the owner. I've heard 3 potential conditions that we might want to come back to. The limit to 180 days, 1 family at a time, and doing some actual site plan adjustments, which is great. And that's what the board is here to do, is to review the site plan. Hopefully you all read, and hopefully it's clear in the letter that I sent to Virginia Tessie, that the planning board doesn't decide what a use is or interpret the zoning. That's the role of the planner. So this is a use. This is the tourist home. I've determined that the proposal is a tourist home use. So it's a use allowed by site plan approval.
I'm sorry, David, this is Virginia here.
Hi.
I'm also, I'm sorry, I've been trying to wave people down, but I'm really not good at Zoom. So could I have a minute to talk or no?
Yeah.
I think you can. I guess what I would like from the board is, if you have more questions for me, technical questions, I'm happy to answer them. Let me know what you want to know or what you have questions about. And then if this discussion can move towards what do you want for the next meeting, if you need anything more from the applicant, if you want to ask for adjustments to the site plan to come back with a new site plan, because as you see, the site plan we have is the site plan that they had approved as a single family home. So it would be reasonable to ask them something else. Oh, I did want to note, tourist house is an allowed primary use. Tourist house is the use. And tourist house is separated from some other short-term dwelling type uses by the requirement that it be also a home for a family. And that is the difference between a B&B that would not be allowed in this zone is if it's not a use that allows a family. I don't want to spend too much time on that because it's not actually up to the board to decide what the use is, but just so that we're clear on that. That's kind of, this is not an accessory use, it is the primary use. Tourist home is a primary use. Within that definition, it talks about that being in addition to being a home for a family.
Wait.
So we're going to go to
David. I have a question before you go on. I'm mulling in my mind the whole issue of defining a family. When you say that
we do have a definition, and it's a very broad definition in the zoning, that a family includes an individual. It includes the general concept of a family, and it also includes a broader definition of people who live together and function like a family. So it can be any of those things. It can be one person, it can be a certain number of people who aren't related who live together. It can be all of those.
So it's, even though the proposal is it's a single family, it may not be what some people.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of putting conditions on, the condition of saying it has to be a family, I don't see how that's enforceable at all.
For the days.
Just for the point of information. I don't think that's enforceable because families, what is a family is much broader than certainly when I grew up.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think
it's just a point of consideration that I don't think we can say that.
I think that we should just regard this as a tourist home, and we can't give a lot of weight to the occupancy, the 180-day occupancy. It's probably not enforceable. Certainly the family criteria is not enforceable. Colleen, I thought your point was very well taken, but I think that we can make a distinction between, say, renting to a family, which has kind of a regularity to it, and having a tourist home, where you have a lot of people coming and going.
He should know it's forest home, right? So that's what we're deciding on. So when we're discussing if we rent to a family, that's just a use under the tourist home. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Wait, rent to a family is a use under the tourist home?
Will it be a condition? Or was it, we're just discussing that as a condition?
No, you use, I'm sorry, you use the example of anybody can buy a house and rent it to, say, a family.
Or just,
that's what I was
just, you know, they could rent a house and just put it on Airbnb or VRBO and not live there. And right now the town of Danby has no walls.
Okay. I thought you were saying they could buy a house and rent it to like a family.
You could also.
And my point was that that's a lot different.
No, I meant like short term.
You know, your point, David, and I see that you've kind of made up your mind that this is acceptable. The role of the planning board is just to mediate the site plan, but we also have an obligation to determine if this is compatible with the neighborhood. That we're really obligated to do that. And I'm wondering if this was most likely, I think it's fair to say, it was most likely intended to be rental all along. Had the applicant proposed that initially, I think that would be a fair way to look at our deliberations tonight. What would we have said, and what would the neighbors have said if the applicant had said, you know, I want to build a house in this spot, and my intention is to make it into a tourist home, which, again, any reasonable person would conclude that's exactly what was going on. Would we have raised issues of compatibility then? And if we would have raised issues of compatibility then I think we're obligated to look at those issues of compatibility as well. And I would actually like to look at the covenants. Is there a way to look at the covenants? Now, I know we have no legal relationship with the covenants, obviously. That's clear cut. But the covenants would tell us what the spirit of that might tell us, what is the spirit of that neighborhood? What kind of neighborhood did they want there? And is this proposal compatible?
So I think there's a couple of things that are important to address there. And the first is you mentioned, is this compatible? And that is really, in general, a question that has been answered by the town board. The town board in the zoning said this is a use that's allowed in this zone. So that means in general, this is a compatible use with this zone. They've legislatively determined that.
I respect that it does not mean that. In general means generally.
In that zone. In that zone.
Which is almost explicitly saying that there are times that it might not apply, or they wouldn't have said in general.
So it is a possible thing that the board could deny an application for site plan review because they find the use in the particular location to be incompatible.
Right.
To get there, to make a defensible decision, if you want to go there, I would strongly suggest that you clearly articulate what makes this parcel particularly worse than the general parcel in that zone. If it's been determined legislatively that that zone is an okay place for tourist homes, what makes this parcel, other than the people who live next door don't like it, a particularly bad place compared to any other lot in the low density residential zone?
It hasn't been determined. It's been determined in general that all the other houses in there could be tourist homes, but it hasn't said absolutely that if anybody wants to do that, they can. Or they
factor,
in general.
I think one factor about this particular area is, I think, whether we determine that, or we as the precedent think that it's more detrimental or less detrimental based on the density of that area, because it is a low density residential zone, but it's within an area of that zone that is already high density compared to other areas of Danby of the same zone. There's a lot of 1 acre lots in that area.
Could I take a minute to jump in here?
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So sorry, this is Virginia Tesse, 151 Beardsley Lane. Sorry that I am inept when it comes to Zoom from afar. I wanted to jump in on a couple points quickly. I agree with David in that that a tourist home is allowable in our neighborhood. The town can grant that. The planning board can grant that. It's not the only thing I agree with David, but the important distinction that I see is that Jeremy isn't asking for tourist home. He's proposing to use this primarily as a rental. And I would encourage you all to, kind of before making a decision, which I know is more likely next month, to look at the definition of a tourist home and to look at the definition of hotel, motel, boarding home or boarding house. Because I think that makes it pretty clear that the distinction is whether the primary use of the house is for a home or whether the primary use of the house is for rental. And to me, you're renting out 6 of 7 bedrooms, is primarily a rental. You are, if you want to rent it 180 days a year on Airbnb or VRBO, you have to advertise it for 300 days a year to get that many people renting it. That's a rental, even though you don't have occupancy for that many days. A hotel doesn't not become a hotel because it's vacant. So that's a primary use, would be use as a rental. The other piece of this that I see, and I don't mean to complicate matters here, but what's glaring at me, I'm a real estate attorney for 20 years, is I'm sorry, was that something for me? No. Is that the planning board is being asked to approve the use of a single family house, which houses one family, for multiple families. So Jeremy's family is going to live in one bedroom and he's going to rent the other 6 bedrooms out to another family. I don't think that's allowed. It's a single family house. If Jeremy leaves and wants to rent it out to one family, that's another conversation, but I don't think he's allowed to do what he's doing unless he either 1 gets approval as a 2-family house or 2 gets approval as a bed and breakfast. So I don't think he can use his house that way. I'm sorry, the other piece, just in jumping around, because I know there's a lot of points here. Everyone's talking about potentially putting in conditions on a site plan approval. There's no way to, once you approve a tourist home, whether it's limited to VRBO or Airbnb, VRBO rents, it rents full houses. And again, I'll point out, if Jeremy's living there, they're not renting a full house. But 2, I don't believe there's a way in any of those websites, those short-term rental websites, to limit who's renting to you. I think you can't discriminate even in those websites, even if the board wanted to.
That's the end of 3 minutes.
Have a lovely night.
I make a couple of responses. First of all, someone mentioned about the covenants. What I'm hearing is that you do not have a copy of the covenants. I actually drafted them, I think it was 30 years ago. I'm happy to submit a copy of the covenants to the board so you have those. And I also am a real estate attorney. Actually, I've known Virginia and Randy Marcus for quite a few years. Has been practicing. And the intent is, first of all, I think actually there are 7 bedrooms. I think the most he's going to be renting is 5. And by limiting it to families and by limiting it to less than 180 days, this is not a business. I mean, that's not the ideal thing you do if you're trying just to maximize income. He can say this, it's only going to be rented to families. He can put those restrictions in, and he can certify to the town, if you want, on an annual basis, how many days in the last year it was rented and that each rental was to a family. That can be documented by him, I guess, on an annual basis. And Virginia's comment is you can't have one family living in 2 bedrooms and another family living in the other 5 bedrooms. Well, that the town board has decided that a tourist home is a permitted principal use of the property.
I would agree. And I think a tourist home is renting out the entire home.
Yeah, we cannot have back and forth.
Ed, I think you've been.
So, I mean, you haven't spoken yet, correct? Can let her have her 3 minutes, and then I'd like to share. Defer to Jody.
As long as you, yeah.
Deborah Montgomery, 111 Beardsley Lane, and I just want to ask a question of David. Can you define for me tourist home in the strictest sense of the word, according to the zoning laws?
I can read you the definition.
Well, I have the definition right over here, but I would like to hear it from you because I heard something before, and I apologize, I spoke out of turn. But yeah, if you could do that, Dave,
so
that would be great.
This is the definition of the use of a tourist home, and I'll also read the definition of a hotel, motel, B&B. A tourist home is a dwelling in which overnight accommodations are provided or offered for transient guests for compensation, provided that such use is secondary to the occupancy of the dwelling by a family. Tourist homes include bed and breakfast, providing that the use is secondary to the occupancy of the dwelling by a family, which is different from the other similar use of the hotel. So we have one definition for hotel, motel / bed and breakfast. They're all together. A building or buildings in which overnight accommodations are provided for transient guests for compensation, including bed and breakfast where the bed and breakfast is the principal use of the premises. So the differentiation here is whether or not the dwelling is a home for a family. And that's why I've made the ruling that I've had made. Hopefully you've read it. The other very instructive part of the zoning is that in the commercial zone, it specifically says limits in commercial A, tourist homes with more than 10 rooms for rent are not allowed. And that's only allowed in commercial B and C. So if you think about what the result of that is, obviously someone considered it reasonable that under the definition of tourist home, you could have a tourist home with 10 beds in the most restrictive zone for tourist homes, 10 beds for rent. So that's why I made the determination that I did. But again, the planning board doesn't decide what the definition of use
No,
is.
I just want a clarification because it does have to do, it speaks to primary versus secondary. And that to me is a very, very important piece of this whole puzzle. How do you determine that? You have 7 bedrooms. What's going to be primary? What's going to be secondary? You're talking about the possibility of him renting out 7 bedrooms at one time. That to me does not connotate a secondary purpose. That's a primary purpose, which is what Virginia and Mr. Marcus was alluding to, that the primary purpose of this facility is to be a rental, which is not in keeping with the tourist home, because that should be the secondary purpose of it. So that's how I'm confused. And so again, it has to go with regulations and enforcement, and how's that going to happen? Who's going to do that? So I think, you know, there's a lot of unanswered questions. There's a lot of things that need to be looked into, and I appreciate those of you that are willing to take the time to do that. Thank you.
So I'm gonna so I guess I have some questions on like site plan. Yes. So there are things that we like right now that's a pretty wide open property. To be honest, it feels like not everything we asked before is done, and not that we can take that into consideration, but I definitely like we're gonna be aiming, you know, like how do we make this not an issue for the neighbors? How do we make this like there's coverage? We've asked before, like, is drainage fixed yet? Are we going to make sure that we're not going to be flooding other people's properties? You know, are these driveways all going to be paved? And where's the runoff going? I mean, these are the things that I guess I'm concerned about, and that I definitely know we can talk about, and should be some of the most concerning. Where is the driveway leading off to? Where is, you know, is it going to the neighbor's yard? Is it going, you know, out 96B? What's happening? How are we protecting it? How are we, you know, right now when you drive by, like, you know, lights are on, like the windows, it's wide open. You know, like what kind of coverage so that not everybody is seeing everything that's happening inside the home. I don't know that necessarily everybody wants to see that. You know, again, lights, again, especially being that tall, basically a 3-story house. I know not legally it's not, but you know, with the deck on top, like, are they going to have lights out there? How bright are they going to be? Are they going to be, I mean, not only the dark sky, but also like even for neighbors. Like if I have a porch light, you know, or whatever kind of lights that I can sit out on the deck at night, and do whatever on 3, you know, 2, actually by that time, you're basically at the 3-story. That's going to shine over a lot of stuff. And that's going to really go out. What do we, you know, how much say do we have in that? Because that is part of the site, because that does affect what we see from the road. It's what the neighbors see. It's what the neighbors see. And I guess those are the things that I want to, you know, definitely make sure, and maybe this is some stuff to think about for next time, but I want to know what we can do and what we can have in place, because that to me is the real, like,
you don't get it to
some of the real issues that if I was a neighbor, I would be really concerned about, you know, are those, and the noise, you know, what are they doing to block the noise? What is really going up in the yard, and how is runoff being handled? All that good stuff. So so that we have a lot of leeway, I assume, with that.
You do. I want to be careful that we are applying the same standard that we would apply to any other person who wants a tourist home.
Right.
But absolutely, the site plan is fair game. You asked, is the driveway going to be paved? So the applicant did not submit a new site plan. So the site plan is the site plan that they proposed previously that you all approved. It does not include a paved driveway. It is a gravel driveway. So that's an easy thing for me to answer. In terms of completeness, just for your understanding, all of the trees except the orchard are in, and there's basically two things, landscaping things that are waiting, and that's the orchard on the plan and the planting on the berm. Everything else that was requested is there as far as my review of it has gone. Yeah.
So if I want to come back and later pave my driveway, do they have to come back to us, or is that not? I mean, they could turn around next year and have it paved, just out of curiosity.
I think they could pave it unless, you know, it was a very specific condition that we didn't want it paved. It sounded like you were saying you'd be concerned about it not being paved.
Well, I want to know where it's going, I guess. Yeah. And if it is paved, then you have anything drip oil, and then the rain comes and it washes off. If it's going to wash downhill, that means neighbors' yards and their stuff is having it. So I guess almost more concerned if it is, unless it's shifted so it's not running off and damaging, you know, causing floods for them people downstream. I think that is a fair thing to look at to make sure it's sloped correctly and stuff.
The way the site is designed now, everything from the driveway will flow into the ditch, which is the community-wide ditch system that goes into the stormwater system there, which you don't want to get into the stormwater system, but that is an issue that we need to address a way to maintain. In terms of impacts from that, you know, we should consider how different any stormwater impacts would be from the approval that's already granted. You know, obviously, if they were significantly changing imperviousness or changing surfaces, that would have an impact on runoff. I do think it's worth addressing that there were a lot of comments about traffic and whether or not the road is designed to it. This amount of cars is completely imperceptible in terms of the design of that road and the traffic capacity. So that's really not an issue, but it will definitely be more wear and tear on a gravel driveway for sure.
I have a question about like the precedent. So if we put more restrictive conditions on this site plan, how does that affect other applicants that come before us, like later?
Yeah, so two things about conditions. The first is that they need to be tied to a particular impact. So we need to articulate what is it that we're trying to address that is related to the use. And they have to be incidental to the related use. So that means you couldn't say you can only have a tourist house if you pick up the house and move it to the other side of the lot, right? Because that's not incidental. That would basically make it impossible. But you can say, you know, we want more fencing, we want more buffering, we want, you know, to prevent the headlights issue, to, you know, minimize noise trespass. It has to be related to something that's real about the use and be something that is reasonable and feasible. In terms of setting a precedent, obviously no two sites are exactly alike. And we always say we're not necessarily setting a precedent, but you do need to be reasonably consistent in the amount of things that you expect in relation to a similar circumstance. So you can ask for different things in different circumstances, but if somebody in a very similar circumstance came and you asked them for nothing or for twice as much, that could be a problem for the town.
But David, it's reasonable to consider a tourist home proposal where there was one bedroom in quite a different light than a tourist tourist home proposal when we're doing the site plan
Sure.
from one that has 7 bedrooms.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else with?
I wanted to add that the screening, I didn't realize that the berm with the lavender was called screening or was meant to serve the purpose of screening. And it's not gonna do much, and lavender is really short, and it's seasonal. So in fact, it looks pretty bad in winter. So I would say definitely some different vegetation on that berm would be important. And probably also on the other side, I think Kelly already mentioned the fencing extension or some trees there as well.
So as we go into this kind of stuff, I'd like you to think about and articulate to the applicant. Do you want the applicant to hear a concern like buffering from a neighbor and come back with a proposal? Or do you want to tell them, for example, you need the fence to go all the way to the front of the property? Both of those are within your power. It's just up to you how you want to approach it.
Well, I still think we need to address formally whether this really is, whether this is really a situation where you keep kind of nudging us ahead in the direction that you believe the situation
Can you
warrants.
turn your mic on?
You're nudging us. You keep nudging us in the direction that you believe the situation warrants in your interpretation, but we should formally, there's a very viable argument to be made that this is a rental property first, and that the residence in the property is ancillary. Everything seems to point to that. So we need to formally address that. And is that compatible with the neighborhood before we start restricting ourselves to already assuming that that's fait accompli, that there's no debate over that. I know one planning board member that thinks it is debatable. So I would ask you respectfully to respect the planning board, that we and the many good comments that have been made by residents. We need to get that settled before we go on and talk about the parameters of the site plan.
But if he lives there 365 days, that's his home. If he rents it out part-time, then that's not their home. I mean, then it's his home first. If he's there the most, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I definitely think we need to look at it. And I do think it's different than what we approved before, just if nothing else, the traffic. There's a difference between you living alone or having a family home and having, you know, extra bedrooms filled up. So, you know, extended family there for 180 days. I get that, but I mean, I definitely want to do some research afterwards the meeting and further into these definitions. And again, that's why I want the fair hearing still next month. And I want us to, I think, to have some more time. We've gotten a lot of information. We've asked some questions. So I'm not ready to vote on anything tonight, but the way I'm hearing and understanding it, to me, it does feel like we do not have, if obviously we have the right, we could always just say, no, you can't do it, but we also have the right to get sued. And that's not something we want to do either. So, you know, I'm just saying that not everybody on the board is the other way either.
You know, we could get sued by either side. I think your point's very fair and reasonable. And it's contrary to my point, but that's fine. I'm just saying that we need to talk this out. We can't just assume that it's already been decided. And maybe that needs to be processed until the next meeting and perhaps, you know, shared. I'd love to look at the covenants in that light and think a little bit more about, you know, Is it a rental? Is it a motel with somebody living, you know, in the building, or is it really somebody's home? And well, you know, in traditional tourist home, the conception that we have of a tourist home, which I stayed in our travels across the country, where a nice family's living there and they have one room upstairs or two. You know, that really needs to be addressed. As uncomfortable as it is, it's uncomfortable. I don't think we should just slough that off, that debate, that consideration. I'm fully prepared to be outvoted if it ever comes to a vote, 6-1. But I think we need to talk it through.
Well, I think the one thing I'm hearing is that it sounds to me like we need more time.
I think so. Yeah.
We still have one other person tonight too, correct?
What?
Don't we? Yes. So, I mean,
and one thing that became apparent to me, just in the processing during the meeting, was that the 180 days, and you can't, a family, there's no way at all to monitor it. We don't even, what's a family? There's no way to even define it. So there's no sense in even including that in the proposal that we accept. Same thing probably with the 180 days. I'm not trying to make a specific point about those things, but just given the chance to talk about it and think about it, things become unfair.
So I don't know, I guess maybe as a motion that we table this, let people get more information, because again, we have another applicant that's been waiting since 7, and I don't want to just shut them off and be like, oh, I'm sorry, it's 9 o'clock, we're going home. So I also don't want to be here till 10 o'clock either. You know, I've got family and I haven't really been home yet today. So I would ask that maybe we could table it. If we email you questions, as long as you answer to everybody, correct? That can be, or it can be discussed at the next meeting.
Can be discussed at the next meeting.
Okay, yeah. So we can ask you questions that you will answer at the next meeting so everybody can hear it?
Yes.
If we have them, okay. Yep. I would make a motion that we do that with this. We'll leave the hearing open and we table this one for next month.
Before you do that, is there anything specific that the board agrees you want to ask for the applicant to flesh out their proposal for next time?
I mean, I'm okay with having them talk to one of the neighbors, because I definitely think there needs to be better screening. Again, the differences between last time and this time is now we're talking about it's a different use, and so I want stronger screening, better screening. I'm all for, you know, them coming up with a plan that seems reasonable to them rather than us dictating it, but and then we can review that and decide if that's enough. So I guess I would ask that they look at more screening and more noise protection and light protection for the neighbors. Again, the difference between one car there normally and 8 cars there is a big difference. I know not on the road, but as a neighbor, when you have that many cars pulling in and out, that is a difference. So I guess I would ask that something get put together to show more of what you're planning on doing to get the property ready to have more people there more often, especially in the summer when people have their windows open, when people are, you know, out more. Like how is this going to be a good neighbor house? So I guess I would ask for that.
I would also the fencing that you talked about, and I feel like it's really difficult to go anywhere with the issue of how you define family. I think we can, but I would like to hear if they have a proposal about how they can be accountable for the amount of time that it's actually rented. I don't know who that would go to or how that would work, but I would like to hear whether there are some thoughts about it. If there isn't a way to do it, then again, I agree. There's no point in even putting that stuff in there.
I think if we do it, like, I feel like the town should be more aware this is happening. Just by what happened with the town of Ithaca, I think if we start putting in kind of restrictions other than the site itself, like the, like the landscape and stuff, I think then this is a big town issue and there'll be a lot of more opinions than who's here.
I guess I just want to hear what they would propose. I'm not saying
this is
we could hear how it would be proposed to happen and we go, that can't work, then we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
I'm curious why that was something
He
that
did
was proposed.
Yeah, he did write it in there.
Yeah.
I wonder if the apps and websites will start doing this because so many towns are putting restrictions now. I was just searching that to see if that's an option. I mean, if you only use VRBO, for example, there may be a way you just have it.
Yeah, and I mean, we had a reason that we needed to rent our house for a period of time and it was a family, but it didn't stay a family. This was years ago and there were lots of problems with it. So I mean, there's good reason to think this through with enough time to really understand what this is going to mean for neighbors and everybody else. So
can I make
your motion?
First of all, obviously we have listened to everything you've said. Some of the points you make are points we expected, and Jeremy and I had talked about, does it make sense to put something which is taller than lavender on the berm, but the board had previously said lavender. So we will get back, before the next meeting, we will give you comments about what other vegetative things we could put on the berm. We have some ideas. We'll flesh them out and put them in writing to you about how you monitor the 180 days. We have some ideas about how you deal with the question of family, screening issues, like that. So our intention is, before, I have no objection to your tabling, before the next meeting, to give you some more details about how those things can make sense and work. The one request I would have, if the board has questions for David, could I get copies of them so I can attempt to answer them?
Sure, yeah.
And
yeah, I will add, any correspondence related to this will be added to the folder online, and we can make sure that everyone has access to it.
And did someone bring up that there is like a deck on the top?
Yes.
So that's an issue in terms of lighting.
Yeah, on each side.
Yeah. That should be addressed.
Okay. All right. So next applicant, they've been hung with us this long.
Oh, you had a
we made a motion. Oh, yeah. A motion to table?
Yeah.
To table.
We didn't have a second.
Yeah.
But
Table.
If we can move on, then without it, then I'll withdraw my motion, I guess. That's what the next.
So we can move on.
We're going rogue on you, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
So who's the?
Oh, I'm sorry. All right. So the next one is 360 Miller Road. And the applicant is it Tomo Shibata?
That is correct. And it's Tomo is still here in the Zoom.
Good.
I will quickly give the board an introduction to this, and then we can bring in the applicant. And there have been a number of letters which were added to the folder. Scott?
I think he went into the bathroom.
He went to the restroom. Do we want to take a 2-minute break?
No, I want to get some.
Bathroom.
I also
want to make sure nobody was having conversations outside. No one's having conversations outside. Someone's using the bathroom by themselves.
Hopefully.
Okay. So by way of introduction, the next application on the agenda is 360 Beardsley Lane. Applicant Tomo Shibata has come through a series of actions came first to the town
It's
board.
not Beardsley Lane. It's not Beardsley
I'm
Lane.
sorry, East Miller. I know. Put the wrong paper in front of me. Yes, 360 East Miller, and the applicant came to the town board and asked for rezoning. The town board said they did not want to rezone. They had recently rezoned this area to a 10-acre minimum lot size. And they were not interested in increasing the density. What the applicant is requesting is a variance that would allow their 4-acre lot to be divided into 4 one-acre lots in the zone where 10 acres is required per lot. They were at the BZA. The BZA reviewed and discussed the application and came to the point of, it was my understanding, and the general rule is that you have to complete SEQR before taking action on an application. I got some input on that, and that it seemed rough. It's quite, a very big variance. I didn't see the BZA proceeding with it, but I said, do we have to do SEQR before considering? And the answer was yes. And we kind of did a straw poll on SEQR. The draft is included, and the draft would trigger an EIS. And the BZA said, gosh, we really don't want to be the lead agency for an EIS. We don't do this very much. We'd really like the input from the planning board. Also took a straw poll, and universally everyone was apt to vote no on the application. But with my input that they needed to do SEQR first, it's a very difficult process at that point. They asked me to reconnect with Guy and clarify if that in fact is the case, and also to forward their draft SEQR to the planning board and see if the planning board would consider being lead agency and or provide input on SEQR and what you think about the variance. This was shortly tabled. The applicant put the application on hold for a month, thought about it, and said, I want to come to the planning board, want to hear what they have to say about it. Since then, I've also gotten response from Guy that although it is an unusual situation to proceed to a denial without completing SEQR, that there is case law precedent for doing so when it's very clear, with the justification that a denial does not have an environmental impact, so it need not be reviewed. The law specifically states that before taking action, the board has to do SEQR and lists things that it considers an action, which includes approval with conditions. It doesn't specifically list denial. So it's somewhat of a gray area, but apparently a gray area that has held up in court, and I think does make sense because going through an environmental impact statement, it's a big lift when there isn't a lot of likelihood of an approval. It's always possible. So with that, you saw in there the proposed site plan of how the lot would be divided into 4 lots. So also, I think worth noting that this lot was originally 8 acres and was purchased and divided, and half was sold. So at that time, it used up the development potential that it had under the zoning at the time. So I guess with that said, we do have the applicant if they want to come on and say anything they want to say about the proposal before we go to conversation with the board. And I will say that a public hearing was held at the BZA. Notice was also given to neighbors about this meeting. Public hearing is not required for you to give input, but I did receive basically copies of letters people had before, and there's a lot of interest, as you might expect from neighbors, in how this would go forward. So if you want to hear from folks, that's also up to you.
Is there anybody who hasn't written a letter that is the letters for?
What are those comments here?
You're the applicant.
You're the applicant.
Oh,
Ms. Shibata, you are unmuted, but we don't hear you. You want to speak up?
Yeah. First of all, I would like to know if you have distributed my application that has a, I don't know, about 10 pages or so writing on the grounds. That was already read by the board members, planning board members. Yes. Okay. Then I guess I don't really have anything to add except maybe a question to Planner David. What is the name of the case law that you mentioned that the SEQR review can be waived?
I don't have a case off the top of my head.
Oh, I see. Is an attorney here available to answer this question?
No.
Okay. Oh, wait. Okay. Then that's all. Yeah, that's all then. Thanks. Yeah, that's all I have to say now. So if there are some questions, I will answer. But this for now, I don't need to add anything more because I think I've pretty much written all I have to say in my first application form.
Okay, thank you, Tomo. Are there is there anyone in the Zoom who did not submit a letter who has something to share with the board? I think we have letters from everyone who's here.
Okay.
Kind of curious with this. So reiterating, so if this divide went through, there would be the ability to build on each lot?
Yeah, a duplex.
A duplex on each lot.
Trying to remember which zone it is.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, I guess I could see issues with SEQR just with water and sewage for that kind of stuff. I mean, I know we need more housing in this county, but I don't know that that's going against the zone to build it and overwhelm the wells and the groundwater and the sewage seems a bit extreme on my side. So I don't know if that would, I would have issues on SEQR about it, about that question alone. I know I would have trouble. I don't know how I could say it wouldn't have a major impact on water and stuff.
Can I respond to that question or like that point?
Oh, no, this is really, Tomo, this is time for the planning board to discuss the application.
Oh, okay.
If they have questions for you, they'll make it clear that they want a response. So I'm going to put on screen, you all have it, but the draft that the BZA put together, and we can look and see if you have any comments for things that you see differently than they did. Let's see. Zoom out a little bit. Okay. So again, this is in your package. This is the part 2. This is the part that the BCA would do, or whoever the lead agency is. So they did ask if you would be the lead agency. I think with the advice that they don't need to complete it, you know, no pressure. But if you wanted to, you could take on that role, and then the planning board would drive that process. But the BZA felt that there were moderate to large impacts on conflict with the adopted land use and zoning, change in use or intensity of land, again, compared to the zoning, would it impair the character or quality of the existing community? Would it have a significant impact on traffic and infrastructure? They didn't find that it would have a large impact on CEAs, obviously, because there aren't any, or energy use because it would have to comply with the stretch code. They were concerned that it could have a moderate to large impact on public or private water supplies and public or private wastewater treatment, on historic, archaeological, or aesthetic resources in terms of the view shed, on existing natural resources, wetlands, water bodies, groundwater, air quality, flora and fauna, and the potential for erosion, flooding, or damage. They didn't think that, four single-family homes would have a significant hazard to environmental resources or human health. One of these is enough to trigger an EIS if it can't be mitigated, which was the concern of jumping into a very large process. So they were interested in your feedback on this and on the proposal as well.
So if we proceed with this, then we would be taking on the EIS.
Yes, so you have you have a couple of options. You could decline to be the lead agency, in which case it would get punted back to the BZA. If they wanted to also say not it again, then the DEC could decide. That's kind of the way that process works. But again, with the information that we've gotten now, that they could take an action that wasn't approving without completing SEQR, I think that's the likely what they would do when it comes back to them. But any input you have, if you want to be the lead agency in the review, or if you want to provide feedback for whoever would be a lead agency or for the BCA in considering what to do. And whether just generally, if this is an appropriate proposal for Danby.
I got to think that my check marks would look much different, if different at all, than theirs. Like I said, if it only takes one to trigger it, like I said, I had one before we even put that up. So, if we take this up, then that means we also have to do the next part. Because at least for me, I'm stand pretty strong on those check marks. So, I'd rather play not it. I mean, if they can handle it otherwise. It just seems to go against everything that was in. I mean, it breaks a lot of the. It's a pretty big request, I guess. It's not a small variance. It's a major request, I see.
And I found it somewhat ironic that they continually reference the meadow, and that they would, just because I feel like adding dividing that up into 4 lots and putting 4 houses on top of the hill that's a portion of the meadow, and that's a viewscape for many people of the meadow. So I definitely think it is not within the character of that zone or the intention of that zone or that particular area, because it is one of the more open, wide view areas of that zone, which was the part of the point of creating more larger lots and more open space within Danby.
Yeah.
Great. So
we want to send it back with a recommendation that this is not an appropriate variance to grant.
Right. Do we need to do it? I should do a motion.
All right, I'll do an official motion that we send it back, saying that we do not think this is appropriate. So that's
Jamie, the new chief. Just the discussion. Should we say a little bit? We don't think it's appropriate because, for this zone, add that, or just it's good enough to say it. What do you think? Pardon?
There's no place to say.
My opinion is that this is not
I don't think it fits the zoning.
Right, yeah, I mean, it's clearly does just that, yeah.
If we're discussing for a second,
compatible with the zoning.
Yeah. It is very incompatible with the recently adopted zoning.
Yeah.
I do want to point out, just for our kind of general learning and thinking, when I look at this SEQR Part 2, I do see the moderate to large check marks in the first three. The change in the community, the change in use intensity, because it's much more intense than the zoning allows, and conflict with the adopted land use plans. And those are enough to trigger an EIS. I want everyone to understand that it would be extremely unusual for a 4-lot subdivision to trigger the other check marks. Obviously, it will use water, it will have wastewater, it will, there will be some traffic, but in terms of generally at the state level, the realm of impacts that would rise to being considered moderate or large, generally those things would be in the no to small. It is up to the board and it's up to you guys, and you're not weighing in on it necessarily anyway, but I want to make sure that we need to be consistent. If, for example, the town passed transfer development rights and someone in this position bought development rights from 40 acres and wanted to develop them, it's not going to have a really huge impact the way a 100-lot subdivision would or something else.
But I mean, for the size of it, and if it was approved, then duplexes could be put in, right? How many houses are we talking about, and how many, like, can they be duplexes in the apartments? Like,
it can't be a
2-family homes only?
Yeah.
For each one?
Yeah.
So I mean, that does seem like if you add, you're adding 8 new families essentially, and not a
16 cars.
Yeah.
Not in a huge area. To me, like, I mean, I know a lot of people that are running out of well water right now. Let alone if you have that many people using it. I'm just not sure. But I think that would have a major effect, because then that's also pulling groundwater from the neighbors too.
Sure.
So I mean, I get what you're saying. That one I would still probably argue with on it if it was really meant something. But I get what you're saying, that we have to be careful about what we're putting for each one. But
yeah,
I would say, to me, it would just feel like, unless we put we'd have to put a stipulation in that they'd have to buy their own water and have some kind of water system. But
yeah,
I get what your point is.
We'd want to knock that up against the town has a level of expected water demand that requires additional studies. So if we were doing further review, we could knock it up against that. And I think when we looked at, does that apply to a single family house? It was like not even in the ballpark. Right. But I don't know how it would compare to 8 houses, for example.
Right.
But if the development rights were transferred here, we would still have to do the EIS, the full environmental.
If it triggered, when it went through SEQR, it triggered moderate to large, that it, you could see those as mitigations. You're preserving 38 acres.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I as I looked at it, preparing for the meeting, I did question a few, but the water one was one that I wasn't really sure, because it was a little, I know it's iffy with well water, so like that one I was questioning. And until you mentioned the view shed, I wasn't sure about 8, but I would consider the view shed impacted if there were 4 duplexes that's 2.5 stories each. It would definitely, I think, trigger. There was something else I was going to say, but I forgot what it was. It'll come to me.
I'm wondering if, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
I'm wondering if in our referral back to the BZA, if we should, what you guys think?
They can't.
They're still okay. If in our referral back to the BZA, we should consider that This is not a even though the zoning has changed, this is not a situation in which, this seems important to me, that in which they were somehow, that their prospects for that lot were somehow diminished with the zoning, because as was pointed out in one of the letters, they had what, 250, 300 feet of road frontage before the zoning was changed. So they had no reasonable expectation to have more than one lot there. I think we might want to mention that to the BZA, but I don't know.
That's a consideration of why you wouldn't recommend variance, because it's essentially you guys don't have to deal with this, but there's always the question of, is this a self-created problem? And it's rare that we don't get to say it's a self-created problem, but this is, I would say, more self-created than most.
Okay, so do we have a motion?
Yeah.
We do.
We're done, yeah. Well, we have to vote, still vote, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bergman,
Yes.
Scriber,
Yes.
Davis.
Yes, but I'm not exactly sure what the motion says.
To send it back to BZA. That was our motion.
With no comments from us, okay.
We had a couple comments.
We had a couple comments.
Send back to BZA.
They'll get all the time. So I'll just bring them this section.
So it'll go back that way. Well, okay.
Cowan,
Yes.
Benucci,
Yes.
Maher,
Yes.
Colbert.
Yes.
Okay. So, well, I was going to check whether David had anything he wanted to let us know before we do that.
I do have a couple of things that I do want to let you know, and then we can adjourn. The first is that, honestly, I wasn't sure if this would ever happen, but a logging law has moved through the CAC to the town board and been sent back to basically me and Guy. I don't have a lot to report on it because honestly, I haven't had time to read it yet and I wasn't involved in the drafting, but it's come back to me. I will share it with all of you and I would love your thoughts and comments on it. And I've also been directed to share it with the state forest, who is probably the ones who will interact with it the most because they have so much land and they do manage some of that land for timber. So we'll be looking for comments on that. I guess was surprised. I felt like I've been waiting for it for 2.5 years and all of a sudden here it is. So I'm glad that the CAC got it off their plate. I'll share it with you all. The next step forward to consider and provide feedback. I don't have any comments on it again because I wasn't involved in the process, but I'm sure I will. We have kind of 3 grant things. First, what should be first? Most pressing. I'm working on an application to the Restore New York program. This is a program that funds, I'm going to say it in the worst order, but demolition, deconstruction, or renovation of vacant or abandoned or properties that have been deemed uninhabitable, and specifically focus on downtowns and hamlet centers. So we have a property across the street, Olivia Vents 2 properties, proposal for a locally serving market that they would renovate one of the existing vacant buildings, which is kind of like a garage space, to be that market. There will be a public hearing on that tomorrow at the town board. You can send comments to me or to the town board if you would like to provide input on that. Yes. There's a resolution of support. We are still working on the application, but there's a very brief introduction because we had to do a notice of intent to apply, which includes kind of the general dollar amount we're looking at, what the properties are, aerial view. we're still working on fully fleshing out the budget and things like that. And I am hopeful that we will be able to have it done and submittable when it's due next Friday. But I'm also kind of considering this as a impetus to really organize the team there. And there's a bunch of other grants. And if we don't quite come together on this one, we'll be ready for the next one, and they'll have done a lot of hard work, and it's all going to be useful. So we won't be submitting it if it's not great and if we don't have a good chance of winning it. But there's a lot of work happening on that right now. You know that the town did receive $500,000 in community development block grant funds for renovating around 13 homes for low-income homeowners. We have an RFP out right now for a consultant to manage that program. The program was an application were drafted by Tomo when we had a grant from Tompkins County that paid for them to write the application and design the program. So that should be in a couple of weeks, and hopefully we'll quickly choose a consultant and get rolling. And we've been working a lot on the state paperwork for that. It's a huge amount of paperwork. I'm really looking forward to having a consultant on board to help with that. And then the third grant thing is that we did receive a grant from Tompkins County to do more grant writing. So we got a grant from the county to get this big grant written that we won, and we won the grant. Now we got another grant to do more of that. Part of that process, putting out an RFP for a grant writer for this year, and I want it to include several public events where we'll kind of inform people about the variety of grant programs that are available and get feedback on what we pursue and kind of what the priorities are. That grant is from Tompkins County, and it does require that these grants, that the grants that it pays to go after do have an impact on housing affordability, improving it. So they have to be related there, but they can also do other things. Yeah, and that has taken up all of my time lately. Yeah. That's my report. Any questions on that, or are we ready to adjourn?
And great work getting the grant.
Yep.
Yeah, that's, I don't know how much of that's happened, so wonderful.
There was one program in the 90s, and then they probably decided that was a lot of work. But a previous planner to me, actually two planners before me, were involved in doing the study that allowed us to get the current grant. So, you know, this stuff takes a lot. They got a grant to do the study that would allow them to get a future grant, that we had to get a grant to get someone to write the grant for it. Yeah.
Who makes this stuff up?
Oh, and the one other thing I just remembered is that we are moving forward on our Hamlet sewer study, which we got another grant for people to study the possibility of providing the infrastructure that would be necessary to kind of meet the town's Hamlet build out goals. And just to understand what that is. And part of that is kind of doing some actual testing of land, and we're having a little bit of a hard time finding people who would have any interest in the possibility of selling the town some land where it would be appropriate to provide water treatment, which is an important component in understanding the possibilities. There's a variety of possibilities the study is looking at, including, you know, what are the limits on clustering systems if you're going to be really small scale, what would make sense, what it would cost, long-term thinking.
So I have just one little, I mean, it's a little thing if anyone is interested in it, but I grew up in a small town called Chatham, New York, which is south of Albany. And there was actually a whole page article in the New York Times that was a controversy that's happening in Chatham about dirt roads versus not dirt roads and how it affects, you saw that? Yeah, I was shocked. I mean, Chatham, it's a tiny little place, but it was interesting. It was similar to talking about, you know, how do we keep the rural feeling of the communities, because that's like 2.5 hours on the Taconic Parkway. And so when COVID happened, lots of the older houses around where my house, which was an old house, have been bought up by people from the city who want paved roads. So just I don't know. I guess I could actually, somebody gave it to me in the newspaper. But if you have a New York Times subscription, you can read it. It's very interesting. Hmm?
I like to do the work.
Oh, so you have to, okay. Anyway. It's just, I feel like I transported from one place to another similar place. Anyway, all right. So we are adjourned.
We're adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Oh.
Good night, and thank you,
I like your
PlanBoard.
cat, Jamie. Your cat was pretty funny. It was distracting. Thought she was going to pull your earplugs out.
He was biting me there for a minute. Hi, Carol. Hi, Catherine. Hi, David. Hi, Joel.
Good night, all. I'm gonna shut it down.
Hi, Ted.